When America invaded Canada? A shocking, true story. In the early 19th century, the young United States of America was a nation brimming with ambition and restless energy. It was a country still finding its identity, eager to assert itself on the world stage. Across the northern border lay British North America. What we now know as Canada, a vast, rugged land under the control of the British Empire. The two neighbors, once allies in the American Revolution, were now locked in a conflict that would test the mettle of both nations, the War of 1812. This war, often overshadowed by the Napoleonic Wars. Wars raging in Europe was a crucible of national pride, territorial ambition, and fierce survival. At its heart was a bold yet disastrously executed plan by the United States to invade and conquer Canada. What followed was a tale of missteps, heroism, and a war that ended in a stalemate, but left scars and stories that echo through history. Chapter 1. The Spark Ignites. The War of 1812 was born from a tangle of grievances. The British Royal Navy's practice of impressment, forcing American sailors into service, infuriated the United States. Trade restrictions imposed by Britain aimed at weakening Napoleonic France strangled American commerce. And simmering beneath it all was the desire of some American leaders to expand their territory northward into Canada. President James Madison, under pressure from the war hawks in Congress, declared war on Britain on June 18, 1812. The plan was ambitious. A swift invasion of Canada to seize control and force the British to the negotiating table. But the reality on the ground would prove far more complicated. Chapter 2. The ill-fated invasion begins. The American strategy was to launch a three-pronged attack into Canada from Detroit, Niagara, and Lake Champlain. The hope was that Canadian settlers, many of whom were recent immigrants from the United States, would rise up in support of the invasion. This, however, was a grave miscalculation. The first major thrust came from Detroit, led by General William Hull. Hull's mission was to capture the British fort at Amherstburg and secure the western part of Upper Canada. But Hull was plagued by indecision and fear of Native American forces, allied with the British led by the legendary Shawnee leader Tecumseh. In August 1812, Hull's forces found themselves surrounded and outmaneuvered. In a stunning blow to American morale, Hull surrendered Detroit without a fight, the first major American defeat of the war. This surrender shocked the nation and emboldened British and Canadian forces. Chapter 3. The Battle of Queenston Heights, a turning point. Meanwhile, on the Niagara frontier, American forces attempted to cross the Niagara River and establish a foothold in Canada. The Battle of Queenston Heights on October 13, 1812, became one of the war's most iconic clashes. Led by General Stephen Van Rensselaer, the Americans initially succeeded in crossing the river and capturing the heights. But poor coordination, lack of reinforcements, and fierce resistance from British troops and Canadian militia turned the tide. The death of British General Isaac Brock, a charismatic and beloved leader, was a blow to the British. But his troops rallied under the command of John Norton and others. The Americans were ultimately forced to retreat, suffering heavy casualties. The battle was a sobering reminder that invading Canada would not be the easy victory many Americans had hoped for. Chapter 4. The Role of Native Allies. One of the most fascinating and often overlooked aspects of the War of 1812 was the crucial role played by Native American nations. Tecumseh, a visionary leader, sought to unite various tribes into a confederation to resist American expansion. His alliance with the British was pivotal in several battles, including the defense of Detroit and Queenston Heights. Tecumseh's leadership inspired fierce loyalty and tactical brilliance, making native forces a formidable opponent. Tragically, Tecumseh was killed in the Battle of the Thames in 1813, a loss that fractured native resistance and marked a turning point in the war. His death symbolized the fading hope for a united native front against American encroachment. Chapter 5. The Naval Struggle on the Great Lakes. While land battles raged, control of the Great Lakes was vital. Both sides raced to build fleets to dominate these inland seas. The Americans, under the command of Oliver Hazard Perry, achieved a stunning victory at the Battle of Lake Erie in September 1813. Perry's famous message, "We have met the enemy and they are ours," became a rallying cry. This victory secured American control of Lake Erie, allowing them to retake Detroit and push into Canada. However, naval supremacy was fleeting and contested with British forces maintaining control of Lake Ontario and other waterways. The struggle for the lakes was a microcosm of the larger war, hard-fought, costly, and inconclusive. Chapter 6. The Burning of York and the Retaliation. In April 1813, American forces captured York, modern-day Toronto, the capital of Upper Canada. The city was looted and burned, including the destruction of the Parliament buildings. This act inflamed Canadian and British resolve. In retaliation, British forces later burned Washington, D.C., including the White House and the Capitol in August 1814. This was the first and only time the U.S. Capitol was burned by a foreign power. These tit-for-tat burnings underscored the brutal nature of the conflict and the deep animosities on both sides. Chapter 7. The Stalemate and the Treaty of Ghent. By 1814, both Britain and the United States were exhausted. The Napoleonic Wars had ended, freeing British resources, but the war in North America dragged on with no decisive victory. These negotiations began in Ghent, Belgium, culminating in the Treaty of Ghent in December 1814. The treaty essentially restored the status quo, and thus no territory actually changed hands. The war officially ended with the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815. Resounding American victory led by Andrew Jackson fought after the treaty was signed, but before news had reached America. Chapter 8. Legacy and Lessons. The War of 1812 is often called America's Second War of Independence. Though the invasion of Canada failed, the conflict fostered a sense of national identity and pride in the United States. For Canada, the war was a defining moment of resistance and unity, helping to forge a distinct Canadian identity separate from Britain and the United States. The war also marked the decline of Native American power in the region, as their hopes to resist American expansion were dashed. The war featured the first use of rockets by the British, which inspired the rockets' red glare. In the U.S. national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner itself was written during the war, inspired by the British bombardment of Fort McHenry. Despite the fierce fighting, the war had relatively few casualties compared to other conflicts, with estimates around 15,000 deaths combined. Conclusion: a war of missteps and meaning. The American invasion of Canada during the War of 1812 was a bold gamble that ended in failure, marked by poor planning, miscommunication, and underestimation of the enemy. Yet it was also a story of courage, resilience, and the forging of national identities on both sides of the border. This forgotten chapter of history reminds us that wars are not just about victories and defeats, but about the human stories and hopes. In the echoes of musket fire and the smoke over the Great Lakes, we hear the voices of a young America and a determined Canada locked in a struggle that would define their futures. The War of 1812 may not have changed borders, but it changed hearts, and that legacy endures.